School, and we're so happy you can join us on this very rainy morning. And if you want to share, what was your first in the chat? What was your first experience creating art? Because that is absolutely the centerpiece of our conversation today. And so, since it's just 8:48, we're gonna get started. So again, good morning, and thank you for joining us. This is a conversation, and conversation is in a string of discussions focused on our community here at Gordon School and our connections to the greater society as a whole. Today, we are honored and privileged to have in conversation with us David Allyn, Gordon's 23rd Britt Nelson Visiting Artist, and Sarah Gance Blythe, Interim Director at the RISD Museum. And so the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist program brings professional artists into Gordon's classrooms. Students work alongside these artists who lead them through projects that mirror the process of the artist's own work. While learning new skills, students draw larger lessons from these professionals, individuals who have found a way to stay engaged in the arts and the world of ideas throughout their adult lives. The Britt Nelson Fund was established in 1996 in memory of Britt Nelson, the mother of then 3 Gordon students and wife of a Gordon graduate. Income from this fund provides for an annual visiting artist, giving Gordon students an opportunity to immerse themselves in one of Britt's quiet passions, the creative world of self-expression. We are extremely grateful to the Nelson family for establishing this fund and for allowing all Gordon students the opportunity to see themselves as artists as well. So David Allyn, who is our 23rd Britt Nelson Visiting Artist, is a visual and performing artist whose work has a rich connection to the Providence art community. While earning an MFA in ceramics at RISD, he discovered Providence's lively interdisciplinary arts community. He found the ceramics studio at the Steel Yard, a nonprofit serving the sculpture and industrial arts community, and his ceramics draw on Providence's rich architectural history. We are very fortunate to have a David Allyn original platter of Gordon School, and when we welcome you all back in, you can see it too. For now, we know what COVID has done. So, and also with us, we have today Sarah Gance Blythe, the interim director of the RISD Museum, parent of 2 Gordon graduates, and we can't forget the aunt of 2 current Gordon students. Sarah joined the RISD Museum in 2009 as a director of education, coming to Rhode Island from New York in positions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art, New York. At RISD, she collaborates with artists and students and scholars to realize exhibitions, programs, and publications, while also critically investigating the complicated history of museums, art pedagogy, and interpretation practices in her own work. Her work includes a number of collaborations with Gordon teachers and students, including a 6th grade lesson that produced work that was exhibited at the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C. So this morning, we are so lucky to be in conversation with David, Sarah, and all of you, and hopefully you will be inspired to tap into that inner artist of yours as well. So how we're going to start is first we're going to hear from David, our artist, and just a little bit about his work and his process, and here we go.
Thank you so much, Claire, for inviting me today to talk about art and art and beyond, I guess. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and I started art kind of by chance, which was kind of quirky. I was a business major and had to take some humanities credits, and ended up in a ceramics department where I was really inspired by a teacher who later claimed that he saved my soul as he rescued me from the world of business and actually pulled me into the art world, which I'm eternally grateful for, because there is no better game for creative critical thinkers than art. And I feel like business would have been it was a great minor, let's just say, which maybe has allowed me to do things like be a studio artist and be self-employed. So I do think that business side a little bit. My creative practice sort of started like in my 20s. I was midway through business school when I really realized that maybe creating was more important. It was the connections with just different people and sort of the sense of purpose that was greater than chasing money, or it just seemed to have like a greater goal, or like a little bit bigger picture attached to it. So I think for me, that was a kind of a really soft on-ramp into my creative practice or being a creative person. And that led me to really challenge myself, get through undergrad, establish a studio. And like I said, I'm from the Midwest. in Wisconsin. And is Jory still out there? Midwest, yeah. But anyway, a little shout out. And then I really started to think more critically about art and started to show in larger metropolitan areas. And then got interested in the idea of pursuing higher art education. And that was quite a process of sort of like traveling and just experiencing different places and interviewing at different graduate schools and just really seeing what was out there. And I got accepted into RISD, and I really haven't looked back. I think New England is sort of great how we're wedged. It's like it feels like the knife's edge in a lot of ways, and in like a good way, and sometimes like a challenging way. But it seems like where art is flourishing, where creativity is flourishing, and it really does feel like the frontier of culture. And I think that was what resonated with me. So, and that's why I decided to accept my offer to go to school at RISD, and that was a whirlwind. I had a great experience at RISD. I graduated with a ceramics degree, but I rarely did ceramics while I was there. I really concentrated on collaborative projects. I worked a lot in New York. I had friends. So it was like kind of the passport to getting to New York is like having a RISD connection. And I had a lot of friends who unfortunately ended up moving to Williamsburg, and sort of like great people that I worked with and sort of got involved in the scene more than the art making. And for me, that was exciting, but also not necessarily sustainable. And my post-RISD experience, just randomly at a chance encounter in a basketball game, it started a conversation about a community art center that a friend of mine was starting. And just literally as like a chance conversation, he had talked about purchasing an old mill site, and I was like, well, hey, have you ever thought about ceramics? And that was the conversation that started the community ceramics program at the Steel Yard. And I think that started in 2004, fall of 2005. And I started that and started teaching classes. And now it's, part of the Steel Yard, which is a really fantastic place. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to go to the Steel Yard. I'm still loosely involved with the ceramics department, but I do more events and other things at the Steel Yard now. But it's a great program. It's fully realized. There's 4 residents right now. There's classes even during COVID. It's obviously COVID's terrible, but there's full programming, and it's a really great community arts center. It's a really great launching place for other dreams. If other people have, experience in different facets of creative work and can take a class, like anyone can take a class at the Steel Yard. And that really, that like really hit for me. And I sort of decided maybe Providence is my place, and maybe Providence is a good place to continue to explore and continue to create community. And my experience has just been, following that path ever since. And I really think there is something great here. There is something to explore here. There's a great crossover of people. There's a great crossover of connections. And after establishing the ceramics department at the Steel Yard, I moved on into a larger mill space. Once again, it's, I guess, a thing I have. And now I'm at the Nicholson File community, and I've been an artist at the Nicholson File community for almost 9 years. I think at the end of this month, it will be 9 years. And this is another great community too. And I could see this community here at Nicholson File. So obviously this is where my studio is. And we have 26 to 28 makers in this building that all do something a little bit different. And that same level of like overlap and connection, I think is really critical for people that are doing a variety of things. We have writers, we have painters, we have designers, we have materials people, wood, ceramics, metal. And I think culture is really critical when it does have that crossover connection point where, maybe there's a poet working with a painter, and I think, or an illustrator working with a writer. I think that's where culture is really vital, is those like connections where those nodes can meet other networks. And I think establishing communities, and I've worked hard to really cultivate or curate this space here at Nicholson File and bring people in that like sort of balance out other assets that we have in the community. And I think there's something really strong to that. And I think there's something like really vital for our culture as far as how we grow, how we learn, and how we, sort of include others in the creative process, because creative problem solving and critical thinking is going to be important as we face a lot of environmental challenges in the future. And I think having everyone work together, having safe makerspace, having, access to knowledge, having access to tools, I think it's going to be a really critical path forward to figure out some of the larger problems and sort of work our way through the complexities coming up. I think there's going to be some obstacles that, if the pandemic has taught us how to adapt, but also how to deal with adversity, I think there's going to be some more things like that on the horizon. So sustainable creative communities are really what I'm investing in right now. And for me, it's great for my practice too, because this is also my office. So I get to work here every day, and this is my office. This is my work studio. It's my performance studio. It's a place where people can meet, talk, exchange ideas, and collaborate. And I think that mostly catches me up on I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but I think that catches me up on to where I'm at right now with my practice. And it's exciting. It's exciting to be at this point. It's exciting to be working.
And so, David, you froze at some point, so we can hear you for sure. We can see your beautiful studio, but we can't see if you're showing us anything or moving around. I am not a tech goddess, so my one thing is turn it off and turn it back on. And if that doesn't work, maybe it'll think. And what I would love.
All right.
Now you're moving. And actually, Claire Blackmer has the David Allyn original that we will be hanging in the library for everyone to see. If it's being stored in her office right there, so she can share it with everyone here. You got to bring it forward a little bit, Claire.
Oh yeah.
I think she's working with a blur feature there.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, she's going to fix it. Thank you, Claire. And so this really ties into the curriculum that David's working on with some of our students here, working with printing and mugs and ceramics. And there you go.
Beautiful.
It's our beloved rock. There we go. Thank you so much. And now, and thank you, David, for sharing and welcoming us into your studio there, and sharing kind of a bit about the artist communities that we have that are extremely active here in Providence. And Sarah, we'd love to hear a little bit about your career and your passion and how you kind of incorporate all that into the work that you do.
Thanks so much. It's really wonderful to be here, to see so many familiar faces, and it's great to have this time to reflect, because I feel like all we do is just go forward. It was wonderful to see in the chat as well how distinct our memories are of making things as children, and that just hones in on how important having art in K-12 education is, as we all have experienced. And I would say that was the truth for me as well. I actually went to a Waldorf school growing up, so making was part of everything we did, maybe more making than other things sometimes. And so that was really the way in which I started to think about the world in terms of the material culture and way we represent. And it was always the way in which I felt like I was getting proximate to other perspectives, other ideas, was through things. Maybe they were ancient things or things made from far away. I grew up in New York City and had the great fortune to be able to wander museums quite often. And my mother's an artist, my sister as well. And so I grew up in this experience, but I've always been very interested in, I remember actually a moment in college when I walked out of my first art history course and into the quad and looked around, and it was such an evident, obvious thing, but it was a sort of epiphany that I could read the world and perhaps understand things better, that I could look around, observe, understand how things were made, and therefore begin to understand other perspectives. And I think that, back to your question, Claire, about the importance today, or this idea of activism, I've been thinking a lot about the sort of the act word in activism, and how works of art can be seen as sort of historical events that continue to act in the present. And then they allow us to get closer to other perspectives, other ideas, other worldviews, and to get this idea of, like Brian Stevens says, of getting proximate to other experiences outside of our own. So I've been really interested in that. And needless to say, a museum is a great place to get proximate to a lot of different perspectives and ways of making and ways of being. So I've worked in museums, I have to admit, since I was in high school. It started with a high school internship, and I've been in and out of museums, curatorial positions, education positions, big museums like the Met, museums focusing on modern and contemporary art like MoMA. But I have to say the RISD Museum is where I am the most excited. I think being in a museum that's connected to an art school that is in a community like David described, such as Providence and Rhode Island, to really embrace this idea of an artist museum and what does it mean to center artists, to center the perspectives of artists, whether they're artists that made things in ancient Egypt or artists making things today like David, I find incredibly inspiring and invigorating. And definitely, as you're saying, David, it's like a reason to make Providence your home.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just as we've touched upon in this year where our movements can be really restricted in terms of where you can go, what is open, being able to bring artists like David through the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist program into our school really continues to allow our children here at Gordon to have those outside of classroom experiences. And that I think is just so critical. And because of David's creativity, he last year when we were fully on Zoom was able to really connect with our kids and provided some amazing opportunities for them. And then this year, being able to actually get in person with some of them. For some of our students, he's a celebrity. And, you're definitely, they're excited. Oh, David's here, he's here. And they know you from the videos from the spring. So that really is something I truly believe is such a valuable educational experience for our kids, of being able to see themselves, oh, you were on my computer screen and now you're in front of my class, and how special that is. And to think about the number of young artists that are really able to kind of bud and, come here. And so I do have to give a plug. I came to Gordon Summer Camp as a preteen, and it was an arts-based camp. It was absolutely not the, kind of what we're doing today. And so I remember being in the art rooms and creating and doing a claymation video. So Gordon is absolutely part of my, artistic journey. So I'm very grateful for Gordon of then and Gordon of today. And so now we have a number of questions. We're a wonderful group, a small group here. If you have a question, please, you can raise a digital hand, you can put it in the chat, and Jeff is going to be here to kind of help navigate that. But let's start off. There's a question both to David and Sarah. What is the relationship between community and art? The school, the studio, museum communities, to name a few. And just how do you've both touched upon this, but how critical are those intertwined communities to keeping the arts community alive and active?
I'm going to jump in if that's okay, Sarah. So I think,
of course.
I think art and teaching are absolutely hand in hand. I think it's a reciprocal process. I think a good artist is also a good teacher. And I think once you get to a particular point with your own search for knowledge, I think giving back that knowledge is vital. And I think that allows you the introspection to actually move forward in a lot of ways, where it can be really comfortable to master something. I guess that's like very traditional or contemporary, like American approach, like master something. But I think that is also limiting in an odd type of way. And I think true masters will always be giving back. And I really think the educational cycle is a circle. And I think giving back is the most important part of that circle. And like I said, with a lot of the collaborations that I do here even at Nichols and File, I'm learning new things. I'm learning to work in Illustrator, but it's a teaching and learning process. As I teach someone how to slip cast ceramics, I'm also learning, new digital tools, and I think that's got to be something that continues. I think there's got to be place for that to continue, and I think creativity, has to thrive on that level.
Yeah, I think what you were just saying about place really resonates for me. We see you in your studio. Many of you are at Gordon at the moment. And actually this year of being away from the places where we're used to making things or being has really perhaps hit home how important and how cited our work is. So I think, back to this idea of, the communities around the studio, the communities around an art school or a museum, and the community of Gordon. I think that's one thing my husband and I always joke that parents, when they drop off their kids at Gordon, never want to leave. And maybe that's why the Commons was created, to corral the parents. But I think what it is also a sense of belonging to a community. And I think what's really interesting is when our communities are open and porous enough that you can find your way into belonging, even if perhaps, unlike many of us, as we just put in the chat, we didn't have the privilege to make art as children or have access to museums, but that still a space such as a museum or even the studio space like Nicholas and File, although I, even if you have inhibitions, I've never made art, I don't understand art, I don't know what to say first, feels like a welcoming place. And I think that's really where our work, where I feel my work is focused. But it's something that I would say that I feel Gordon models so well, is this sense of, belonging. And, it's something that I always heard my children saying, and I felt like I really learned from them about how to create environments and spaces and places that are places of belonging.
Thank you both so much. And something really masterful that our visual and performing arts faculty do here under the direction of Millie with Amy and Erica is that they have the ability to make every child feel that the art studio is their home. And going forward, we're very lucky to be with, to being able to have kids actually be in the physical studios for the remainder of this year. And so having every child feel successful and having every child feel, as we share with different materials, picks up the crayon, picks up the, the paper and the crayons, that they too can create something that is wonderful, and that it's not just the child that can draw really realistically or has experience in art in the past. So that is something that we're so grateful for the arts faculty here to be able to, make every kid feel that it's their space. And that's just, as we can see in the chat, so critical to who we become as adults. And so we've touched a bit on, you've both touched a bit on this, but what place do you feel that art has in this current moment? There is, societal upheaval. We're in the midst of a climate crisis. And so where do you feel that art and the activism space really have their power?
I'm going to jump in on that one. So I think art, it's a critical time for art. And I really believe artists are kind of the canary in the coal mine in a lot of ways, where I think truly creative thinkers are in front of a lot of these issues. And, we talk about a lot of these issues. We work on work that combats some of these issues. It's like, we try to get the voice out there. And, I think as creative people, we are sensitive to a lot of the environmental issues. So I think a lot of the conversations that are happening in our studio are, very much along the lines of a lot of the social struggles that we're having right now. And I think that's a great place there has to be some place safe where this dialogue can happen. And once again, sense of place is allowing people to get together, to feel comfortable expressing ideas, to feel comfortable to being wrong, to like changing their views. And I really think the arts and creative culture is a really good starting place for that conversation. And how we implement that, then that takes everyone. So it's a place for dialogue, and that we are talking about these issues, I think, is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's that both and you're suggesting of both, this idea of criticality about how things are, the systems, the history, but also imagination of the possibilities. I really love this phrase by the activist and writer Bell Hooks, who says that experiencing art is the closest we can get to freedom in an unfree world. And I think that the more that we offer opportunities to encounter, to consider together, I think that's the other thing. We very often can think of making art or experiencing art as a solitary experience, but I think when it's done as a communal experience and offer opportunities for conversation and dialogue and even expansive thinking. I find very often when I'm in conversation with people around a work of art, let's say in a museum, and Jory and Jackie on this Zoom call have also engaged in this, is that it winds up going into places that you would have never imagined, and it's that very moment of the sort of I feel like a community is created for a moment together, a community that hadn't existed before, and this imaginative of possibilities. And to me, that's back to that idea of the work acting in the present. So it might be something made in the 19th century, and you're talking about it, perhaps you're relating the depiction of a woman or the depiction of society to the current moment. Then that work of art is again acting in the present and allowing us to imagine. So to me, just as Dave is saying, it's this really important and slightly intangible place. And I think we're in a moment where we want facts and we want concrete direction and we want the tangible, but I think we also need spaces of imaginative possibility and expansive thinking.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both for that. And I love, again, what's happening here in the chat and just kind of sharing your experiences. And so this question is directed to Sarah, and then actually maybe David, you can hop on it too. Is so you shared that RISD is an artist's museum, and so how do you center the artist? And how has this reformed the institution? And then David, as an artist who displays your work in RISD, how do you see that RISD might be different than, I'm not naming any other institution, but different than other institutions that do not consider themselves an artist's museum?
Sure. So here, I have a little link I'll put in the chat to just give an example. So when you visit the RISD Museum, there's works of art from the ancient times to the present day. And gradually what we're doing is shifting the way in which we tell the history of art or display the history of art, not from this idea of styles and periods and the ancient Egyptians that led to X, Y, and Z, which is it's a way of telling history that has a lot of limitations, needless to say. But this link I just placed in the chat is to a very small paint box that is in our Egyptian collection. And it actually is one of my favorite works of art. So it's not a work of art, it's a tool. It's an artist palette. You can actually see where this artist from about 1000 BCE had used a bit of the blue paint, a bit of the green paint, and so forth. So it's an object that's been used. And it's a perfect example of how we center artists and the perspective of the artist. So how did the artists of ancient Egypt get their materials, create works of art in response to what was being commissioned? And this can be taken all the way through, so that by coming from the perspective of individual makers rather than this idea of history and how history is organized, one begins to think through many different perspectives. And I see connections between this and how Gordon's curriculum is organized, very much through individual contributors, thinking about writers that are not usually the writers that students that are in typical curricula, thinking about diversifying who we listen to and so forth. So the idea of centering an artist museum starts from how we display works of art, but also our programming that always involves artists. Sometimes it's an artist in conversation with an economist, really thinking about how do artists shape our world? How do we understand the world through artists? It's also through things like an artist membership. So if you identify as an artist, nobody's going to check to see. The museum is free to you. You are a member. Artist fellowships that give artists financial support to sort of embark in new directions, and countless other ways. But again, this constant reminding ourselves that if we center the idea of making creative practice, then from that, so many other issues can be considered. And with that, of course, is all the emerging artists that are part of RISD's community, as well as the practicing faculty.
Great, thank you. And that's a fantastic piece. I've been to the museum countless times, taken art classes in the museum, which was one of the very pivotal pieces of my youth. And there's little pieces like that you absolutely walk right by. So David, how does it feel, the relationship with RISD Museum, how might it feel different from other museums that maybe don't so explicitly share that they center the artist?
Well, thank you, Sarah. I feel like you actually took a lot of the words right out of my mouth, because I've been involved with various programs where I've been invited to speak. I've had curators come do a studio visit. I've been collected by the museum. I've worked in the permanent collection. I've been asked to perform at the museum as my music persona. Uncle Thirsty, and the rich connection that I had, which is amazing, and the rich connection that I have with the museum is ongoing, and I consider it a relationship. And I don't look at the museum as us and them. A lot of times museums, you look at artists as maybe not second class, but maybe inferior in a lot of ways. I feel that I'm like included in the museum in a very thoughtful way, and to me that really feels special. And I have worked in other museums, but the connection that I have is just not the same. It's not like a personal connection. I don't know people there. Like you said, the fellowship too. Our studio mate Jazz, good friend of mine, is the fellow right now, and she's great. She talks about the museum all the time, and that's another point of connection, and then sharing for our community. And I just think what RISD's doing with education through the museum is sort of demystifying that ivory pillar, and sort of pulling back the curtain and allowing it to be inclusive, and allowing people to have an experience at the museum. And I think that is really rich and really unique as far as my experience working with other museums.
Great, thank you. And as you know, a Rhode Islander, I think the RISD Museum is fantastic, and I'm so excited to introduce that to my children as well. And as we all know, it's never too early to introduce our youth to art in the sense, and then go home and create. So that's always an amazing thing to do on a rainy day like today. And so, David, speaking directly towards your time here as the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist, how do you feel? What do you see as your impact on the kids? And also, can you speak into the process? What's the reaction of making? Like so I've seen some projects go home. The cups have been amazing. The brick, I don't know if they're supposed to be walls, but the brick structures. And so how do you feel that this impact of having hands on this material and seeing another, real life artist, how has that impacted the kids here?
Thank you. That's a great question. And it's COVID, so ideally I wanted to work with everyone on hands-on projects, and that became infinitely difficult because a lot of the process that I do is very tactile, very hands-on. So there was a bit of brainstorming, and like you mentioned, one of the projects that I do get to collaborate. So I literally made a cup for almost all the kids, and I'll be doing workshops next month with the kids. So I'm also doing some videos that are associated with how this gets to this point. And then I'm doing some basic workshops to decorate these things with stamps, stencils, other printmaking techniques, but very much consider it a collaboration with the kids, and very much talk about it as a collaborative process. Like, I'm investing in this object and investing in you to finish this object. And at the end of the day, I'm sharing this with you. And then I think that hopefully demystifies the whole process of being an artist. And then very much my videos are associated programming with it. We'll be sharing my studio, and we'll be sharing my practice, and really trying to talk about being a maker. And this is a viable way to, like, earn a living or make a living, or being an artist doesn't have to be something that's a mystery. Basically just really trying to talk about, look, I can make art, you can make art too, let's make art together, and really try to, talk about that as a concept. And not, everyone just likes decorating a cup at the end of the day, but I do really try to push the idea of, hey, we're working together on this, and hey, this is part of my practice. So, and I think a lot of the kids were getting it. A lot of the eighth graders for sure definitely got a sense of like, oh, okay, like, how'd you do that? Or how did you get the logo on the bottom? Or what other printing techniques can I do? And I think that for me is really fulfilling too, because when they start to get it, it's, then you can kind of translate these larger ideas. And I think, it's a great program, and I'm such a big fan and honored to be the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist this year. It's been really good so far.
Thank you. And Sarah, as both an art educator and a parent of two Gordon alums, and maybe, how do you feel that a program like the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist is important to our society as a whole? And how do you feel that having an artist come into a school community really impacts and kind of, I want to say, sparks the fire of making?
Well, I mean, I think definitely sparks the fire of knowing that you were going to ask me that question. I just asked my kids. I was like, so what impact did that have? One of them said that, what was super exciting was of course, meeting an artist, but also seeing that there's so many different modalities and ways of working, which is very different than perhaps sort of the ways in which one you have an assignment in a class and everybody's doing the same assignment, and you begin to see people's different perspective on realizing that. But when an artist comes from the outside and really is about their style, that made a big impression. And then the other one is becoming an artist themselves. So I would say that William definitely sees a direct connection between the art program at Gordon, the social justice curriculum, and his direction as a filmmaker. To that very point, Dave, is that it demystified the fact that being an artist in the world, that one can make a significant contribution, that it's doable, that it's not a mystery, and that there's a way in which one can have a career. But I think that is, all too often the privilege of very few, that this pathway to access to making art, to what art can be, is, what some kids get, not what all kids get. So I think that, ways in which we could expand and think about the pathways and access seems super crucial right now. But yeah, I would say, the art program at Gordon, because it was what everybody did, it's not an option, it's core and center, I think is fundamental to both of their perspectives now. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And you just sparked something that if, we've been doing this program since 1996, and therefore there are some Gordon students that are now, I'd like to say, full-fledged adults, and trying to figure out, do we have Gordon alums who came through the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist program who could be a Britt Nelson Visiting Artist fellow? And so really, I know, Claire, so we have our work cut out for us of really connecting with those alums. But that's so fantastic to hear. And yes, it's an all-in aspect. And because of COVID, our ways of, what I've noticed that the Gordon Art Department has in a fantastic way is displaying children's art and feeling it being put on a pedestal, as you would see in a museum, and feeling such pride in the work that they're doing, that it's not just parents that are, oh, I love it, but the whole school is celebrating the art and celebrating what they're doing. And really this year, Amy has gotten quite creative on how we can display art in a time where we're not letting any of you in the building, to be really honest. So I think that that's really fantastic what Amy's been able to do. Amy Cohen, our middle school art teacher, of, putting things on the windows and on the glass corridor. And she's done a lot over here next to the Nelson, the theater entrance. And so really, and over in the vestibule to go into the Nelson Center. And so it's really, we are being as nimble as possible. And Claire said, need to get to a museum. We absolutely do need to get into museums. And so really, I have one more question I would love to open it up is, how can we better ensure museums and artists are more accessible to everyone? And how do you feel that COVID has impacted you and your work positively and also adversely?
I'm gonna jump in if that's okay, Sarah. So for me, COVID's been strangely difficult, but also really successful. If I have to pivot one more time, though, I think I'm gonna barf. But it's been an opportunity for me to learn new skills. As maybe many of you know, I've been doing little instructional videos since I can't be hands-on with students or be teaching at the Steelyard, for example. And learning video is a really great way to translate knowledge, also like connect people. And I think that has been one way I've sort of like dealt with COVID and have been able to thrive. And those tools post-COVID, I think, are going to be really helpful for me to sort of like strengthen my various association with my networks. So now through this experience, I'm a stronger node and I can connect with people and maybe share these ideas, maybe like, figure out better platforms and, use information technologies to share ideas. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, that is a positive takeaway. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we get through it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, over a year now of a profound loss, profound stress, yeah, incredible tension and invention. And I think the question now is, you know, what do we carry forward with us? I think a lot of things that seemed intractable, we leaned into and found solutions. And I think that particularly, I could say cultural institutions have been in desperate need of reinvention, perhaps since their inception. But, you know, I think I've been thinking a lot about the conversations about systemic racism and cultural institutions that I was having in the 90s when I was in college. And they were just conversations, you know, just talk that got highly theoretical very fast and did not really find any kind of implementation in the changes in how we do things, the way we rethink things, who's at the table, et cetera, et cetera. So I think moving out of this moment back into our work, the question is what do we actually start doing together? How do we actually bring this work forward? But as you're saying, David, I mean, so much has, you know, we've reached people that we never thought. We have a teenager in India who shows up to our teen program at 3 a.m. I mean, it's extraordinary every single time. And we have grandparents convening with their grandchildren in family programs because they're in different parts of the country, but because our programming is virtual, they're finding a way to connect. And, you know, Jackie's been doing an amazing series of conversations. Again, in some ways on a screen, you can look really close at a work of art and you can have a conversation. It's not the same as being in person, but I do think we've gotten over our perhaps over fetishization of, you know, the sanctity of a museum or objects. And it's really about our relationships with one another. And I think, you know, we can care for and have relationships with one another in these formats. I think one question we have, which I'm sure is a question for Gordon and everyone else, is we can't possibly maintain both at the same time. And so the question is, what do we move away from in the virtual? What do we come back to in the physical? What is that blended reality that we're going to move into? So that's a lot of where our conversations are at the moment.
Thank you. And we still have a couple more minutes. I know, does anyone want to kind of unmute themselves, ask a question, a comment? I know Claire Blackmer, who's very involved in the performing arts here in Providence. We've seen what they've done. We know that Rodney Lopez has been doing some online theater. And so just, you know, I'd love to hear, we're a nice group. We can kind of unmute if folks want to chat and ask
I really
questions.
love Sarah's use of the word fetishization. You know, it's like with the performing arts anyway, no actor of, you know, on stage ever wants to be filmed while acting. You know, it's just absolutely flat and it makes no sense and it's not the real thing and it's not live. And I think we're all going to have to kind of get over that, you know, because like with the work that Wilbury has been doing all year, you know, we've had people being able to Zoom in from Australia to see things. You know, it's like, you can't lose that. You know, you cannot lose that word of mouth and that sort of innovation. And it's encouraging, I think. It's encouraging to me. I think a lot of, maybe because I'm old, a lot of the younger people, I think, are struggling even more with it, which I find interesting. I thought that they would embrace it a lot more, but I think that they sort of still struggle with the notion of, you know, that sort of protective preciousness, you know, and it's like, no, let's open it up. Let's like just blow those walls out and see what we can do. You know, it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, and David has the videos he did in the spring. Karen, you mentioned it. They really were amazing, and I know still being watched. And I believe you said there's a new video that you can share with us. I do not. We purposely did not, or not sharing David's video right now of me screening it. I feel like that always is disastrous in a Zoom situation. I'm very aware of my limitations. And so we'll be able to share that with you after. But would also love to hear, you know, I know we have many artists and art educators in the room, musicians, of how, you know, what do you think should stay and what should go? You know, how do you see the space of making change? You know, as Sarah shared that they have a teen from across the world that's coming into their teen programming. And that would never be able to happen if all the teens, were meeting here in a physical space. And so we'd love to hear from all of you and our questions for David and Sarah.
I'm actually curious if it's, maybe it's too early, but if students have had that conversation, like they're the ones who've been put into this really intense position of their entire small world moving online. And yet, given how naturally optimistic most kids are, I imagine that there's takeaways about what they appreciate. Like Sarah, I don't know if the teen program has started this conversation at all about the future. Yeah, so just kind of putting the question back if anyone's been talking to, I have a 3-year-old, so we're not having that conversation. There's conversations with older students that are reflecting and looking forward, what they're thinking about that kind of hybrid blended possibility in the future.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to has a lot to do with, I'm noticing sort of where they are in their, age group. Needless to say, a lot of the college students, RISD students, like what they miss is the studio. I mean, they went to art school because it was a hands-on tactile thing, and it's very collaborative. And I think the collaboration, while it is possible in this kind of mode, because we come to the table in our boxes, is not the same as collaborating on the floor of a studio or, sitting together and eating together and so on and so forth. So, but the teens, I mean, to your point, Jory, like they're doing something pretty incredible now is they're working to acquire our work of art for the museum by doing studio visits for, in Japan and so forth. So again, our imaginative possibilities have just exploded. And I'm looking forward to that both and moment. Is like, how is it both that kind of, yes, I can dip into a studio in China or Japan and learn about manga, and at the same time, be in Providence, Rhode Island, and with my other high school friends. I don't know. I think that's super exciting what could happen from that. And this idea of locality just completely collapses. Yeah, it becomes really fascinating.
Collapses and also brings a greater awareness of the appreciation that we can have for physical spaces where we can. And same with the museum, the site of the museum. I think, Sarah, as you were speaking to before, the fetishization hopefully dying down a bit, but also just greater appreciation for the kind of holiness of those spaces in a new way, that both things can exist.
Yeah, completely.
And Jory, I too have a 3-year-old who is excited to have an art teacher that is not me. But the massive amounts of boxes that just show up at our house somehow have been really the ultimate art playing experience of, what is this and what is not. So yeah, I'm
with you.
Jeff, yeah.
I just want to say how much I appreciate the experience at Gordon and the experience of in Providence of raising kids and demystifying participation in the arts. The Britt Nelson Visiting Artist program really normalized the idea of a working artist and blew up any sort of mystery about their process by having our kids literally working alongside them and knowing what it's like, but also getting to know somebody who does this for a living, or the experience of being close to the museum, going to the museum, and maybe there is a little bit of drama about the lighting and the way things are staged there, but also knowing that that was Sophia's mom that works there, or that this is a installation that Oscar and George's mom put together, and the fact that those jobs and those roles in the community are accessible in a way that there wouldn't be if we lived in London or New York, have given my kids a really, even if they don't pursue arts, it brings the humanity to the whole process and to the objects in a really, really nice way. So I appreciate David and Sarah both your role in keeping up that demystification.
And for those of you who don't know, Jeff is also the parent of 2 Gordon alums, 2019 and 2017.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So those big teenagers now. And so Jeff, do you just want to share a little bit about the what Frances Martindale has put together to
Yeah.
continue our
So,
learning?
I mean, we're talking about things that need to stay the same and things that should change with Zoom. It's been really wonderful to be able to have these Zoom conversations, and it would be really hard to gather you all at 8:45 on a Friday morning. So I know that this way to engage with each other over Zoom is is still going to happen in the future, even when we don't have to do it. When we have a program in person at Gordon, historically, our librarian has gone and loaded up a cart of books that are related to whatever topic is being discussed that night, so that parents can literally leave with a picture book and go home and explain to their child what they were just doing down at Gordon and open up a book from their own library and again make that connection. And we're all missing that. So Frances has made a annotated bibliography of the books that she would have put on the cart today. So I'm going to share that in the chat right now. And they're all books that you, Gordon parents, or Jory, we'll let you in too, could borrow today. And there's a link in there to the process of how to borrow online too.
Yeah, so that's just, as we say here at Gordon, and this year I think has probably been harder than most to really encourage the parent community that we are not just here to work with children and have a wonderful open learning environment for them, but it's also for our parent community to engage in conversations like this and take that next step and some, children's books to share with everyone. And so I really want to say thank you to David and Sarah for joining us. Thank you to the Nelson family for establishing the Britt Nelson Visiting Artist program. We've had a number of other schools reach out to us saying, hey, how do you do that? And what would that look like? And can we talk? And so it's really wonderful to be leaders in the community on such a critical topic like this. And your knowledge and passion, David and Sarah, on the arts is truly a gift. And we're grateful to have you within our community and happy to see Sarah wants to come back with her children as, graduated out of Gordon. And it's so wonderful to hear that we're still considered their home and there's still such a wonderful connection to our institution. And so thank you all for taking the time this morning and joining us. Thank goodness it's over Zoom because it is not a pleasant day outside. And if you do get a chance, David's going to share some of his recent videos with me and we'll post all that up online so that you can see it as well. Please make a trip to the RISD Museum this spring, visit David in his studio, visit the Steel Yard. It is really an amazing place and outside. So for those with, pretty conservative COVID precautions, it is, old factories are a fantastic place for ventilation and large air exchange. Same thing with the RISD Museum, big spaces, high ceilings. So please check your emails and social media and our blog and see what's next. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day and not feeling like springtime, but we're gonna all make it. So again, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And there's a wonderful conversation. I look forward to seeing you all soon.